is Dawood Halisi Al Malik.
Tell me about yourself, Daoud Halisa Amalik.
It's a story that I find very, very interesting and at the same time inspiring. To begin with, I
Where
was
were you
69. I was born in Giddings, Texas in 1946. We moved to Washington State in 1954. Take that back, 1955, to Seattle, Washington. And I lived on 21st and Alder when we first got here. Green Hills Juvenile School for boys. And I went back for joyriding. I was 14 years old.
And the second time?
15. 15 years old. My mom, dad, whole family was pretty
How many
much.
in your whole family?
There was 13 of us. 13 of us. 8 boys and 5 girls. I was the 10th of the 13. I was wrongfully convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder, 4 robberies, and 1 first-degree assault. And I was given the death penalty. I spent approximately 4 years on death row. All total, approximately 7 years as a condemned prisoner. And in 1972, the United States Supreme Court ruled that capital punishment was unconstitutional in its present form. Therefore, everyone that was on death row throughout the country at that particular time was released from death rows. And I was released into the general population at Walla Walla Penitentiary. My experience at Walla Walla on death row was one of very, very sad moments of not just Great Depression, but moments of sadness, moments of loneliness, moments of also fear, I must admit. But at the same time, I think my determination, my belief in the fact that I knew that I was innocent, that I would not be executed, in spite of the fact of being there to be executed. But I never, ever thought that it would happen.
What did you do?
While I was there, the things that I did to keep me going, I read aloud, I studied, I did a lot of what you might say introspection. I spent 49 years, 5 months, and 29 days to meet the challenge, step to the plate, and to meet those challenges. And we did make some positive changes for everybody. And when I say everybody, even the guards, it was made it much easier for them. There wasn't that much stress and tension in the situation, in the air. And it was a much better, peaceful situation than it was before the protests began. The 80s started taking a change came about there. Instead of rehabilitation as it was in the 70s, reform as it was in the 70s, the philosophy changed to basically lock them up and throw away the keys. Hard time for hard crimes.
What's hard time?
Nothing. You got nothing coming. You get nothing. Well, they didn't completely cut it out. You had the library still, and that's what kept me going, was able to have access to the libraries and things, legal and regular libraries. So I read aloud, studied aloud, and just continue on. Also, they had programs at that time, too, where you can get an education. And I pursued my Associate of Art degree, which I achieved. Also, I got a Bachelor of Art degree from the Evergreen State College. So I tried to take advantage of the opportunities that were available. And now today, you don't have any of those programs inside prisons hardly at all.
They're gone.
They're gone, and that's I don't know. It's terrible. That's how changes are made. They're dealing with just lock them up and throw away the keys, and you don't have anything coming, and you shouldn't expect anything. When you complete your time, get out. The system, the philosophy started changing from reform to lockup. Also, there was what you might say quarantine off the prison, where we couldn't have access to each other, or we couldn't organize, or we couldn't strategize, or we couldn't do anything to come together as a group. And also, when we did try to come together in the 80s, lockdown, shut down, just voluntarily go back to ourselves and don't come out and don't do anything. And they would use PC, protective custody, to help run the penitentiary, the guys that was in PC. So that killed off any type of communication or struggles. Just took the air out the. I was released from camp February 25th, 2015. I would like, first and foremost, for the politician to recognize the need to truly make the necessary changes to make prison a better place where people can come out better human beings. That's what I really, really would like. It's very essential. And I wouldn't use the term rehabilitation. I would use the term habilitation. Because rehabilitation, when you get down to the nitty-gritty of the word itself, is to return back to the former state. So if you're broken and you don't know anything, why return to that state? But if you habilitate, you rebuild, you give energy, good, positive, structured energy to that individual or to that entity to make them much better. And that's what habilitation is all about, and that's the term that I think that we should be focused on and should utilize in the process of making prison a better place. And so with that process in place, what you call restorative justice, you got the community involved, you got family involved, you got everybody, business, everybody trying, involved to make it better. And it ain't no situation where I think everything's going to be perfect, but we can definitely strive to perfection. Give them the tools, the information that they need in order to make themselves better. And once you get that information, we all know, too, that change begins from within. And once they have the information to make the necessary or come to that realization, then change can take place. My future plans to me is to be the best me, the peaceful me that I can possibly be. And if I can assist in helping in any way, shape, or form of making the prison system not just a better place, but helping get rid of prison, period. We don't need as many prisons that exist. We don't need that. We need more jobs. We need more opportunities. And I'm not a politician. I'm not trying to be no politician or anything. But we do need to look at education more than prison. If we have more money's going into the schools, more schools, then we'll have less prisoners. And that means that people are more focused on really, truly helping each other. And that's what we need. I have a petition in the Ninth Circuit Court that I'm waiting for the court to rule on insofar as making a decision. The DNA in my case have been misplaced and lost, they say. So I'm waiting for the Ninth Circuit Court to rule on my petition that have been pending for approximately 3 years to exonerate me from the wrongful conviction that I've been convicted of. The proof is there. But they're saying that since it's been lost, there's no proof. I don't understand the contradiction, but that's what I've been battling, and that's what I am battling. They acknowledge that it was there, but now it's no longer there. So the burden and the onus is on me to come up with it, they're saying. I don't understand it, but that's what I'm dealing with, and that's the current situation presently. And once they make that decision as to whether or not to grant me a new trial or to dismiss the charges altogether, that's what I'm waiting on. And in the meantime, I'm just struggling with it, and I'm going to continue to pursue it even if I take it to the U.S. Supreme Court. But I'm doing the process myself, pro se, so I don't have an attorney representing me at this particular time. I've been doing it myself, filed it myself, and this is where I'm at right now.
Are you searching for an attorney to assist you?
Yeah, I certainly am. I most certainly am. And I'm hoping that one would step forward and see the injustice and help correct that, help right this wrong.
My name's Antonio Ruiz, Jr. I'm Mexican-American, Aztec Nation, 32 years old. I spent 16 years in prison for 8 assaults. Clear memory of my actual crime is just being young and dumb. Young gang member, knucklehead, and really didn't care about the world. My only care in the world was pleasing myself, so it was an extremely selfish type situation that I was going through. And not only that, proving to others that they weren't who they actually thought they were. So my crime was actually committed not based on drugs, alcohol, money, or anything. It was actually based on showing the world that I can be a Scarface type, a mobster type, the next American gangster, the next story, for the nation to read about in a newspaper or see in the news, actually. I wanted to see myself on TV, and it wasn't entertaining. Well, to me, it was entertaining the world. It was just showing the world that, in a negative light, to us, that was our positivity, doing something extremely negative. So my crime is a vehicular crime. It wasn't a vehicular assault. It wasn't actually, I wasn't actually charged with a vehicular assault. I was charged with assaults, which my original charge carried some odd 70-something years. Got it all the way down to almost 16 years. Throughout the course of my actual time, I caught more time within the prison system. So my charge just to clarify everything, what led up to me being charged was, as a gang member, I had two individuals in a car with me, and a situation arose where I wasn't really proving to them that this is who I am or this is what I can do. I was showing them that this is who you're not and who you can't be, is more or less what I was doing. So in the act of my gang life, I used the car as an actual weapon. I ran over 8 individuals, 2 of them being young women. My age at the actual time was 17. So I was, in the event of everything, I was charged as an adult. So I spent my Friday after Thanksgiving in a juvenile, Saturday, Sunday in a juvenile, and Monday morning I was turned over to the county building. So that's when my actual time started. I sat in county for nearly a month. I got bailed out. I was out Christmas Eve. I was returned in May of 2002 to prison, or to the county building, when they revoked my bail. And then May 21st, I was actually sent to actual prison. By August of 2002, I was sitting in a cell in Walla Walla, Washington State Penitentiary. So my initial prison experience didn't actually start till then. Everything from the Shelton Receiving Center, that's all right. Everybody's still friends, so you don't really learn the politics of what you're getting into. When you get to the larger facilities, you learn the actual politics of places. Me being of Mexican ethnicity, my background being completely that, I guess I wasn't really accepted by the Mexicans, and I wasn't really accepted by the Mexican gang members, and I knew that growing up. So my whole thing was become the individual within the prison system. Within that prison system, they didn't call me Antonio. They didn't call me my last name. They called me by one of 2 things. One was a DLC number, which is actually 841393. And the inmates within that place called me by my moniker, which is Blue. Surviving in the prison system, well, everybody says violence actually begets violence. So words aren't as useful in a place like that. If you don't show everybody, hey, I can actually stand on my own too, it's like anything else. Nobody's going to help you. An environment like that, you have to actually show the people that this is who you are, this is what you're going to become, and this is how you're going to do your time. By that, you gain the respect, you gain, I won't say a friendship, because, you know, most people aren't in prison to gain friends, but those few fortunate individuals, they gain a family. They gain individuals around them they become so close to that it's almost more of a family you kind of are thrown into or jump into. And in that family, you know, just like any other family, you're not willing to accept any less. You set your standards high or low, however you want, but most of us set our standards high, and that's what you expect from that family. So you get around individuals of your social liking or your social background, and you push forward. For me, I kind of hit every wall holding us in there. And by that I mean any violent act you can possibly think of within the prison system, I've more or less interacted with, or I've more or less involved myself and interacted with other individuals in committing some of these things. That's not the prison setting. The prison system is actually an extremely educated one where if, like me, if you come in as a knucklehead, most of these older individuals who've been there 20 plus years will actually sit you down and tell you, hey, man, this is not the way. You can either do your time hard and sit in segregation or the hole, whichever you want to call it, or the IMU. You can do your time that way, or you can do your time real well in a cell with the possibility of a job that's not going to pay you anything, but you're going to appreciate it because you have some sort of an income. Your only third option is find some kind of an addiction, drugs, or whatever it may be. My actual addiction in that place became my art. So I tattooed. And in doing that, I actually got a bunch of tattoos that are real crappy, but it was fun while we were doing it. For an individual to change in there, you got to find your lowest point, just like anything else in life. My lowest point was realizing that I had a child out in the world that I was actually searching for from day one. He was born actually nearly a month or so before I was initially incarcerated. But I hadn't lost hope or thought of wanting to know the child that is my son even today, or wanting to bring my son into my life. It was the fact that I got a child out in the world and I wouldn't want him to follow in my footsteps and enter into this prison system that is actually getting worse as the younger generations come in, because no longer is it older individuals being incarcerated who actually have some sort of a sense and understanding that, it's easier if you do it this way. You got a lot of young individuals who are coming in with 70 plus years, and it's ruining a lot of it. But my turning point was actually realizing that my son wouldn't want to be in my life, and I wouldn't want my son in my life knowing that every other step I took was a fight, was being a political member of any one facility or any one group, or being extremely violent. I wouldn't want my son to know that life. The reason I took the first step in changing my life was for him. My steps from that point were not easy. They were a bit complicated because I had to actually detach myself from individuals, who were going in a more negative direction and who were actually still hitting that wall. I took every program I possibly could to become a better person, to not only become a better person, to become a more productive person once released from prison. My steps from that point, which were somewhere about the midway point of my time. So I still had about 7 or 8 years to actually perfect and adjust the individual that I wanted to be, to actually pull out the negative parts of my lifestyle from the successful person and more positive person I wanted to become. And as I did that, I realized that a weight had been lifted off of me, a weight that I could only say the Atlas man held on his back. The world was just lifted. It floated as it does now in space. So, I may not always smile, but that's that whole prison mentality. There's times you get confused and you get this angry look on your face because you're thinking. That's our thinking spot. My smile is 100% genuine, regardless of what I'm smiling or thinking about. And I smile for my change. I smile for the life that I'm living and loving. My steps to release were actually a fearful one. I was scared of leaving the larger facilities to these smaller facilities because I knew that there was people there that would not understand my walk, my path, my change. Because the camp facilities, the minimum facilities, individuals are just coming from what we say, the streets. They're coming from freedom. So that's what they're looking forward to going back to where I've been sitting down in a cell somewhere, not having to think about freedom. So, small story on how I ended up at camp, which is actually a crazy, almost somewhat violent one. I was pulled into my counselor's office, and my counselor told me, "You're going to camp. Where do you want to go?" I immediately got mad. I walked out of this lady's office, and I walked around the day room at the facility I was at, in the unit I was at, and one of my good partners comes up and says, "What's going on, bro?" I says, "I think I'm going to go in here and do something to this lady, man, because she's playing with my life." He goes, "What?" I said, "She said I'm going to camp. Where do I want to go?" He says, "So you're going to do something to her because she's telling you where you want to go?" I said, "No, I'm going to do something to her because she's playing with my emotions, man. She knows I'm not going anywhere." So we go over and ask her, "What is my time structure?" She tells me, "You have 4 years left. You're going to minimum. You're going to a camp facility." I turned instantly hot, like nervous beads of sweat were coming down my face. She says, "Where do you want to go?" I said, "Large Mountain." She goes, "Nowhere else." I said, "That's it. I don't ever hear anybody want to go there. That's where I want to go." She said, "Okay, you'll leave next week." They give you enough and take everything away. Everything that makes you the individual that you are, the man that you have to be in the world, they take it away. And when they put you back out, they don't give it back. They leave you with the notion that this is bad. This is not good or healthy for you. Now I sit here today, 2 months after my release, loving every moment. I don't have all the money in the world, but the money I do have, I pay whatever bills I have to, and whatever's left after that, I have fun. I live life. I live and love, and I create. I'm out here. Freedom. All those around me, they also live and love with big smiles on their face.
My name is Clint Larry. I'm an American Indian from the Pacific Northwest. I was born in Washington State. I'm a descendant of the Salish people. Over 10 years ago, I was fortunate to learn more about my Native American heritage and spirituality. Through my culture, I discovered my passion for beadwork and bead artistry. Many of the pieces I make are influenced by the Pacific Northwest coastal arts. Losing myself in my art allowed me a way to find peace during some of the darkest times in my life. With my creative process, I started to notice I was invested in a pastime that kept me attuned with myself. I noticed my perception and perspective started to change. I was reaching my goals and taking the steps to close the gaps between them. Beadwork and bead artistry is often a signpost of a time, a place, a feeling, or an experience. As beadwork lovers and bead artistry makers, we have a chance to create those memories for others while deeply understanding all the reasons it is important in the first place. What we've created while expressing who we are and who we are growing to be. I was 16 when I committed my crime. The idea I was 16 when I committed my crime. That idea was the worst one I've ever had because it cost me most of my life in prison. I was raised in a dysfunctional home and have been on my own since I was 13 years old. When I was a kid, I didn't have a positive role model. I'm not blaming my actions on anything because I take full responsibility for the poor choices I made. I believe that if I would have known better, I would have done better. When I was in my young teens, I was looking at life like it was a movie. I was living life like it was a real-time movie. The reality of the situation was it wasn't a movie at all. It was very real. I didn't understand pain or hurt. I didn't care about anybody or anyone. I didn't understand too much of anything, to be honest. I was a very dumb kid that thought I knew everything. All I did was hurt everyone. The loved ones I had, my victim and his family. My actions caused so much pain. If I could only go back in time. I was incarcerated at the age of 16 and sentenced to a total of 50 years in prison. Instead of being confined in a juvenile detention center, I was placed with adults in prison. I am currently incarcerated for murder in the first degree, kidnapping in the first degree, and 2 counts of robbery in the first degree. In 2015, Governor Jay Inslee signed House Bill S. In 2015, Governor Jay Inslee signed House Bill 2 SSB 5064 into law. This bill affects persons who have committed offenses before their 18th birthdays. This House bill allows for certain individuals who committed their offenses prior to their 18th birthdays to receive sentence reviews before the Intermittent Sentence Review Board, the ISRB, after serving a portion of their sentence. An individual sentenced to a determinate sentence of 20 or more years is eligible for review after serving 20 years. The ISRB must hold a review hearing no later than 180 days prior, and if release is not granted, the ISRB will set a date for the next review, which could be up to 5 years. The Department of Corrections has outlined specific programs that are supposed to transition us successfully back into society. The truth of the situation is the programs aren't helping at all. I am currently taking a re-entry release life skills class at Coyote Ridge Correction Center. The program is based upon the Louisiana Department of Public Safety and Corrections pre-release preparation program. The personal development curriculum we are learning is what communication style am I using if I'm lying to get what I want? A, passive-aggressive, B, passive, or C, aggressive. Which are you hungry? That reentry class I'm taking goes on for about 3 months with the same style of curriculum. I'm also taking another reentry class supported by the National Institute of Corrections called Thinking for a Change. There are 4 sessions in the curriculum. In session 1, lesson 3, we are learning how to ask a question. 1, decide what you would like to know. 2, decide whom to ask. 3, think about different ways to ask your question. Pick one way. 4, pick the right time and place to ask your question. And 5, ask your question. In session 2, lesson 3, we are learning thinking check-in. Part 1, brief report of the situation. Part 2, brief report of your thoughts and feelings. Part 4, find new thinking. In session 3, lesson 14, we are learning a social skill, responding to anger. Listen to the other person who is angry. Try to understand the angry person is saying and feeling. Ask the other person to explain anything you don't understand. Number 4, show that you understand why the other person feels angry. And 5, in a pro-social way, express your thoughts and feelings about the situation. The curriculum is the same throughout the program. The curriculum is the same throughout the program. Offenders in prison are supposed to be successful in the community with those reentry programs. In the United States, more than 2 million men and women are behind bars. Another 5 million live under the control of the criminal justice system. Few, if none, of the prisoners are prepared for the tough transition to their new life beyond bars. Finding a place to live, getting a job, and reestablishing with their families are just some of the problems facing people getting out of prison. The world doesn't meet and greet ex-convicts with open arms. Without practical guidance, many ex-cons will quickly find themselves back in prison. I personally believe that prisoners need to start preparing for release while still in prison. Some of the key things we will need to learn is how to survive the parole system, dealing with family members, especially spouses and children, halfway houses and work releases, finding a job or going back to school. Is there organizations that help ex-cons? If so, what are they? Where do prisoners find them? This is not what is being taught by the Washington State Department of Corrections. Prisoners need help to successfully re-enter society. After release, I would like to have a good place to live where I can take the time I need to safely re-enter society. I would like to have a job that pays the bills with my eyes open for better opportunities into a job that I can enjoy doing. I would like to reestablish my relationships with my family. I would like all my interactions with my parole officer to be positive. Overall, I would like to transition back into society in an appropriate way. Personally, I see myself taking it one day at a time. The most important thing to me is I have made a choice to never put myself in a position where my freedom could be compromised. That is the most important thing to me, that I will never put myself in a position where my freedom could be compromised. I look forward to sharing my new life with the world. With great respect from the Washington State Department of Corrections, a prisoner at Coyote Ridge Correction Center.
One of the most poignant questions that I was asked was my perspective of the system after being down since I was 15. What is the biggest failure of it so far? And from what I've seen, the biggest failure of the system is being socially conditioned to be independent for everything. We don't do our own bookkeeping, we don't do our own budgeting, it's just everything's done for you. What you eat, when you eat, all of those sort of things, what jobs you can and can't have. So it's easy to fall into the program, so to speak, of just being told what to do, how to do it, when to do it, and not thinking outside of the box, not being self-motivated, not really caring. I believe it comes down to the power of your definitions, how we define ourselves and how we define our environment directly correlates with how we're going to relate to it. So if I come into this system and I'm allowed to think of it as a vacation, then I'm just going to play. I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to learn anything. I'm not going to mature or grow at all. If I come into it with the definition, either self-definition or a past someone passing on the definition of it's a gladiator school, and I'm going to go out and I'm going to look for a fight. If I get told that hey, it's a college, it's a way to go get an education, then I'm going to seek that. If I think of it as a spiritual retreat, then I'm going to put myself in those positions. That's what I'm going to enact. So, and no one takes the time to teach other people that. No, I won't say no one. Some of our own motivations, but as far as administratively, that's not taught. Learning that it is what you make it. I mean, I'm sure most people have heard that. Be too blessed to be stressed, or you can be too stressed to be blessed. That's your choice. Myself, I'm immensely blessed with a support system, a family that no matter how hard I pushed, it never let me go. I have a beautiful woman by my side now. I choose to focus on the positive, then things go amazingly well, even all of this. And an example was I was stuck in the rut for a long time. I was stuck in the convict code, quote unquote, mentality of not caring, of not living the BS that's in here, for lack of a better term. And I was blessed with, my sister came up, and I'll try to see if you guys can put my little niece in my arms. And she told me something extremely life-altering. She said, just because you're doing life doesn't mean you can't have one. I had that moment of panic, that moment of fear as I looked down, and this little baby in my hands and realized how many people these hands have hurt. And knew fear for the first time in a long time. I didn't want to hurt this baby. I didn't want to hurt my family anymore. So just hold that baby. That moment will echo the rest of my life. I'm grateful for that opportunity, that ability to grow and change and love and be loved. And then looked at me and said, you know, I'm not going to bring him to see you if you're always in trouble and through the glass, and take advantage of the contact visits, and they need their Uncle Bear in their life. So, blessed. Like I said, it's an amazing thing to have that kind of support system. For the people that are facing a release or whatever that don't have that, something set up to where they can find a support system within themselves. One of the other major failings of the system is that once you're released, the majority of parole offices or probation offices or whatever tell you not to have contact with any other offenders. Well, like an AA or NA standard, going to find people that you relate to, and if you lived it, understand it, felt it, not going to feel comfortable. You're not going to feel their own family because most of them can't relate. So something built or structured or available for have that chance. People to anonymous, I don't know what you want to call it. Something similar to that should be set up. There's so many things, and it's just one voice echoing in the tin can, but hopefully somebody hears it and try to make some kind of difference. But I've decided after 25 years of seeing people in and out, there has to be another way. There has to be a better way. And instead of saying, why can't they fix it? Maybe I'm asked, why can't I fix it? So, in closing, I'd just like to tell people that these walls and these razor wires are meant to hold me in, not hold you.
When I was 14, a juvenile court judge decided that my case should be processed as an adult criminal matter. This meant that I'd be tried in adult court, and if convicted, I'd receive a sentence no different than an adult would for the same crime. I was convicted, and I was sentenced to life without parole. Over the 18 years I've been confined, I've watched our prison swell with other youngsters who, like me, are serving sentences for crimes they committed when they were juveniles. The entire U.S. Supreme Court agrees with the findings that there's a fundamental difference between juvenile and adult minds. Specifically, that the parts of the brain involved in behavior control continues to mature through adolescence, and teenagers, due to physiology, lack the capacity for adult moral reasoning. The Washington Department of Corrections has in its custody the youngest person on earth to ever be sentenced to life without parole. He was just 13 years old. He's now a 37-year-old man. I don't know if the legislature will ever establish a system of periodic review for youth sentences as adults, but I know this. When the theories and presumptions underlying our laws are proven false, those laws should change to reflect a new understanding of reality. And as for juveniles, the presumptions that supported treating minors as adults have been proven false. It's time for the laws of Washington to reflect this reality. Thank you. I want to make one quick point before we go. As I was reading the excerpt about the American Psychologist magazine about the way the juvenile mind works, it reminded me of when the police were looking for me for the offense I'm in here for right now. And I'm from Seattle, West Seattle, and when the police were looking for me, I drove to Tacoma, and I thought to myself, they'll never find me out here. You laugh now, because that's how silly it is. I was so young, I thought Tacoma was that far away. So when we're talking about brain development, if you ask me what I was thinking of when I was 14, can't even explain it, because who would think like that except a child? And that's what you got in here for. I'm never getting out of prison. I'm going to die in prison for the act I committed when I used to think like that. That's just a fact. That's all I got to say.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. This is the State of Washington versus Jeremiah Bourgeois, cause number 921064444. The defendant is present in custody, represented by Mr. Ellis. I'm Risa Wu on behalf of the state. The defendant is currently serving a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. He was convicted of aggravated murder in the first degree and assault in the first degree. In 1993, he was found guilty after a jury trial on April 16th of 1993, and he was sentenced on April 27th. Since that time, his case has gone up on appeal. It's been affirmed on appeal. So for our purposes today, this is not technically a resentencing. We set this hearing because as a result of a Supreme Court case, Miller versus Alabama, the laws in the state of Washington have changed. And now, as a result, Second Substitute Senate Bill 5064, which is, the laws are now effective June 1st of 2014, the mandatory sentence for the crimes that the defendant was convicted of is a minimum term of 25 years in prison and a maximum term of life in prison. And so this afternoon, the parties are asking the court to sign an order setting that minimum term. And
then the maximum is subject to review by, is it the ISRB that handles that now?
I believe that's correct. So Mr. Ellis and I crafted an order. I sent it to Mr. Ellis. He has had the chance to review it. I believe he's signing off on it right now.
I've also modified it just a little bit because I'm not ordering that he was previously sentenced. I'm just finding that he was previously sentenced. But I think we can modify that pretty easily.
Okay. Also, I prepared and have provided Mr. Bourgeois with a copy of his limited rights of appeal as a result of today's order.
All right, thank you. Mr. Ellis, did you want to be heard on?
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. It is an agreed order. And despite the fact that the court really doesn't have any discretion today, this hearing is not of no moment. Obviously, it represents a remarkable change in both the laws of the state of Washington and also Mr. Bourgeois' situation.
How old was he at the time of the crimes in question?
He was 14.
Oh, because he's very
If I can add a personal aside, my youngest daughter is 14 right now. She's spending her summer in between middle school and high school, and I would describe her with many superlatives, but I would never call her an adult. Mr. Bourgeois was arrested, and 4 days after that, my oldest daughter was born, and she's now a college graduate, and so that tells you how much time he spent in custody. But let me relate, for me, a really profound transformative moment came in my practice, and a moment that really decided the kinds of cases that I want to work on, which obviously today leads to Mr. Bourgeois' case. A little over a decade ago, I had a conversation with an inmate in a Texas prison who, like Mr. Bourgeois, had committed a murder when he was a juvenile. And what he told me was the importance in his desire to give back, and the importance of the criminal justice system reflecting some way to give back for the wrongs that you have done. And until today, Mr. Bourgeois has been told the only way that he can give back, the only way that he can make amends for the terrible crimes that he committed, is to spend his entire life and die within the prison walls. And thankfully, the law now recognizes that is wrong, that some amount of discretion for crimes committed as children have to apply, and we have to take into account the possibility, especially with children, of rehabilitation. Now, the person that I spoke to in the Texas prison wasn't given that opportunity. The so-called great state of Texas executed him, and only a year later stopped that vile practice. We've come a long time, a long ways. Executing juveniles. In 2000, the individual I spoke to was named Napoleon Beasley. He was the second to last juvenile executed in the United States, when in 2000, and only a little more than a year after his execution, the United States Supreme Court decided Roper versus Simmons, the case that really focused the Eighth Amendment conversation that then led to Miller versus Alabama, and then led the Washington legislature to pass the law. So I've had the same conversation with Mr. Bourgeois about his desire to try to make amends for his crime. And so it gives me great pride, not only as his lawyer, but as a citizen, to say that we now give him that opportunity to pay back, not only with decades of incarceration, but the possibility of making contributions in the free world. And I think that is an opportunity that I welcome. So I appreciate the court setting the hearing today. I do believe Mr. Bourgeois would like to address the court.
Mr. Bourgeois. And stand up only if you're comfortable standing up.
Oh,
I want you to
stand
fall. Not be able to catch yourself.
That's fine. I'm grateful that I have an opportunity to be released one day. But I don't want anybody to think that I'm not cognizant of the fact that I destroy lives, and that's why I'm here. My mom came to this country from East Africa. She was able to raise a family. She opened a business, built a home back in her native country, and she lives there now. And I'm here today because I killed a man who immigrated from East Africa and opened a business. And I shot and seriously wounded another one who was his co-worker. I know this is a tragedy of my making, and no amount of apologizing or saying I'm sorry can change anything, but I truly am.
Thank you, Mr. Bourgeois. I'll sign the order that I think essentially modifies the original judgment sentence to conform with current law. And Mr. Bourgeois, I don't want to say I'm glad is the wrong word. I feel it's a good thing that you obviously not only have done a lot of growing up, which you've had a lot of time to do that, but also that you've done a lot of introspection and you've come to understand, not just intellectually, but emotionally, the impact of the things that you did that led you here on other people's lives. And nothing I say is going to make any of this right. And so I'm not going to flatter myself that I have that power. I do think, though, that it's fair and just that you have an opportunity to look forward to something in your life that will allow you outside of prison. There will be other people who are going to be charged with the decision of whether and when that happens. But I am glad that you're going to have that opportunity. And I deeply hope that you keep the good things that you've learned. Prison's a really hard place to learn good things. But the good things that you've learned and really that you've developed over the years, that you keep that alive and that you nurture that. And that you do whatever you can in terms of education and positive work, whatever's available to you, to let yourself in the meantime while you're in custody to keep growing and to be able to improve other people's lives. It won't make up for what happened, but it will help. All right, I will sign the order.
As you can imagine, it wasn't an easy task to get these men to come up here and share their stories. It's not an easy thing to do. Our next presenter is going to talk about one of the hardest things to live with in prison, a sentence of life without the possibility of parole. This topic is very close to my heart because for the first 8 years of my incarceration, I had a sentence of life without the possibility of parole. Although he is only one person, he speaks for many of us who have lived under the crushing weight of those 4 little letters, LWOP. Please welcome my friend, Art Longworth.
I made some notes, but before I show them to you, I'd like to tell you about Tony. Tony liked math. I saw him send away for math books and teach himself calculus and trigonometry in here. By himself. Somehow, don't ask me how, but he got other prisoners interested, and he taught them too. He always worked. Even after he lost part of his hand in the license plates factory, he went out and got another job right away. He ran a lot. If they let us into the yard for 3 hours, he'd spend every minute of it running. And he encouraged others to run. He bought things from the prison store, like candy bars and coffee, toothpaste, soap, and he sponsored races in here that he didn't run in. I think so others would have a chance to win. Because if he had run, they wouldn't have. You ever know anyone like that? I can't help but feel that Tony was worth something. He cared about other people. And he lifted spirits in here many times. I knew him for as long as he was in prison, which was 25 years. Until he hung himself in his cell earlier this year. Tony had life without parole. He was one of about 50,000 men and women in this country who have that sentence. 50,000. In fact, I'm one too. I got it more than 30 years ago, not long after leaving the last state boys' home I grew up in. Although my face doesn't accurately represent this sentence, because 2/3 of those who have life without parole aren't white people. 66.4% nationally. 65% who have this sentence received it for a non-homicide offense, which I'm ashamed to admit isn't me either. But I do know this sentence, because it's impossible not to know it when it's been your experience for as long as you can remember. That's why I want to talk about life without parole. Honestly. Because inside these walls, it doesn't feel like people outside are doing that. Our legal system defines life without parole as non-capital. In other words, no different than any other prison term. So courts uphold life without parole in ways the US Supreme Court prohibited for capital punishment more than 40 years ago. This means that life without parole can be, and is in this state, handed out as a mandatory sentence that no judge or jury has any say over. And life without parole cases, they don't get the same kind of representation as cases the court does recognize as capital. It's not even close. A well-off shoplifter in this state can get better representation than a poor person facing a life without parole sentence. There's a lot wrong with that. But I think the root of the problem is the hypocrisy of a legal system that holds the actions of those it judges to a different standard than it holds its own. Now, I know that's hard to grab onto like that, but try to follow the line of thought. I think it's important. Courts assess culpability, or they weigh out the blameworthiness of an individual by viewing their crime through the lens of intent, right? Think about it. The intent of an individual committing a crime defines what the crime is. Often it's the difference between first degree or second degree or a different charge altogether. It's a fundamental principle of law. It doesn't make sense that a sentence issued by a court isn't viewed through the same lens. And when the intent behind a sentence changes from allowing for the possible reform of an individual to his or her death in prison, when that's specifically what you send someone to prison to do, to die here, how is that sentence not fully capital? Lawmakers have a different take on life without parole. In fact, it was politics that created this sentence. In 1972, state legislatures across the country enacted life without parole statutes. It was in response to a nationwide moratorium on the death penalty. Our state was no exception. Although life without parole was originally enacted only to be used for those who otherwise would have received the death penalty, had it been in place at the time. However, once life without parole was on the books, lawmakers expanded its use through the idea that this sentence is a way to be tough. What's wrong with this is that sentencing so many people to life without parole without reviewing them at any point in their sentence isn't toughness. It's not tough. And I don't say that self-righteously, because I only learned it myself through the crime I committed as a young person. Not having compassion, not caring about any human being, no matter who they are, or how much you feel you're angry at them, or you think you hate them, or whatever. None of that's toughness. It's ignorance. Enmeshed in politics is the national campaign to abolish the death penalty. Although death penalty opponents seem to derive their understanding of life without parole from the courts, because they endorse this sentence as something less than execution. Their campaign promotes life without parole as a safe and just alternative, a mercy. Maybe death penalty opponents are misled by the term life. I assure you, if you shared this experience with us, you would know that life without parole is not life. In fact, that's exactly what it isn't. And promoting societal acceptance of life without parole legitimizes death in prison as a practice and has repercussions beyond this sentence. It supports all death in prison sentences. And frankly, it frames them as a condition that isn't so bad. Know that this kind of sentence is inhumane. It's torture in the eyes of the rest of the world. For that reason, the international campaign to abolish the death penalty doesn't support it. A campaign that does support it even in the face of such racial disparity, grates against the history in this country behind the term abolition. The academic community, I think, comes the closest to understanding life without parole. Academics at least look at it objectively, right? They're the ones who coined the term warehousing to refer to prison as it is used nowadays. Packed full of people with long-term sentences, with no serious system of reform or review. They describe life without parole as exclusion, albeit permanent. They analogize it with banishment. You've heard of that before, right? Banishment? It's a punishment from way back, from the old world. It predates incarceration. But academics don't quite have it right either. I mean, the term warehouse isn't accurate because a warehouse doesn't harm or destroy what it stores. It doesn't cause the product inside it to become less useful or compatible with society. This does. Neither is this mere exclusion. Prison in the US isn't a place where you go and merely do time. There's nothing passive about it. It's an active, aggressive form of punishment. Maybe you don't see this from outside. And maybe that's what the walls and fences around prison have come to be used for, to keep you from seeing that bad things happen to people in here as a matter of course. In reality, doing time is getting used to watching people be harmed and destroyed in front of you. We become hardened to it in here. I guess because we really don't have any other choice. We steel ourselves against it as a means of continuing to eke out our own existence. But that doesn't change what this is. No modern society has prisons as harmful as ours. And nothing is worse or more aggressive than being in here without hope. This isn't banishment. Let's be serious, okay? We didn't get stuck on a ship and sent to America. That's not what's going on here. So what is life without parole? Not what institutions or individuals outside the experience say it is, but what is it really? I can tell you that none of us who have this sentence got it for nothing. And because of that, because of the crime I committed, I'm not up here to advocate for or against this sentence. My intent is to relate it, to try to convey it to you, so you can decide for yourself whether or not you think a state institution should be doing this. Or at least if it should do it to so many people. The only way to even begin to understand life without parole is to imagine how you would feel if it were happening to you. You think you can do it? For anyone who's willing to try, let me describe for you what you would experience. Life without parole is hopelessness. You learn to survive, if you can, to exist. But it's only a holding on, a dogged refusal to quit. It's not because there's a path in front of you down which you might walk in order to redeem yourself. At no point in this sentence are you allowed in any way to make up for the crime you committed as a young person. No matter how vast the difference between who you were at the time of the offense and what you do or make of yourself in the decades after. Nothing. Nothing is in front of you except the end point of the sentence. All you were really sent to prison to do, to die here. And with no point to work toward other than your own physical expiration, your will to live inverts. It turns in on itself. You feel as though you're being crushed, as though you can't draw in breath, as though you're only pretending to still be alive. Life without parole is the death penalty. And when it's happening to you, you realize that you don't have the same luxury as everyone else. The luxury of being able to pretend that that's not what this is.
My name is Mary Jane Foster. I am the widow of Pierre Adair Parent. He was a prisoner in Washington State. He was Ojibwa from Leech Lake. His number was 289201. He was a prisoner in Washington State for 40 years before his death in 2012. We were together for 20 years in various visiting rooms across the state. We were not allowed to have a wedding. We tried 3 times. After the Department of Corrections rescinded the rule that denied trailer visits for anyone who was not married at the time of their conviction, that lasted for about 10 years, you couldn't have trailer visits. And so we didn't put in an application until that was rescinded. The first time, the counselor did not want to do the paperwork and told us to wait till we got into another facility. The second counselor left the completed paperwork on his desk and neglected to send it on to the state capitol. And the third attempt, the CPM, Corrections Program Manager, this time told me on the phone that they could accept alternate identification other than a birth certificate. Then they told my husband that they would only accept a birth certificate. After my husband's death, I talked to a retired federal judge who told me that yes, I did have a case, but that I would never win it because it was an old boy system, and I'm not an old boy. I am recognized by the coroner's office in the state of Washington as his wife on his death certificate. The saddest thing my husband ever told me was that at 9 years of age, he did not see any future other than prison. It became a self-fulfilling prophecy. I met Pierre Parent in 1995. I attended a 6-week course that was run through the University of Washington's Experimental College. The course was designed by the prisoners. They took you from their arrest through jail, trial, sentencing to prison, intake, and then to their first facility. I volunteered to come back, and we developed a friendship that blossomed into the love of each other's life. This is a poem written by Jeremiah Gilbert entitled The Love I Haven't Had. I tried not to stare sitting there in the visiting room, just 2 tables over. They held hands and observed passers-by, both smiling in time. He's done 37 years now. She is still at his side. They needn't speak much to say to each other, I'm still here. He tried to run her off, hoping she'd find another to love, though to her, a whispered kiss, in quiet shared, burned hotter than flesh on flesh. He smiled as he told me, she's as stubborn as I. I smile as I see them sharing the love I haven't had. That describes what we did have. Pierre was an elder and a pipe carrier. He mentored a lot of young kids of different skin colors who came into the system. Pierre and the other lifers taught them how to survive in prison and how to become reasonable human beings, not the animals they are sometimes viewed as. We went through medical problems, changes in administration, moves to different facilities, and we came through them all because we had an agreement from the beginning that the time we spent together was too short to bother with petty problems. If one of us brought something to the table, then it wasn't petty, and we dealt with it. We waited for years between parole hearings, health issues, and family celebrations for a release that we never got. Pierre died in February 2012 at Providence St. Peter Hospital in Olympia. At the prison, there was a pipe ceremony for the native prisoners and a memorial service for everyone else to honor his memory. He was well loved and respected. The issue I want to address is the less than adequate medical care provided by the private for-profit medical services that make a very, very large profit from the less than adequate medical services they provide. My husband Pierre had at least 10 different prescription medications for heart problems, diabetes, and other medical conditions. The last 3 years of his life, he was always out of some medication, sometimes 2 or 3. These were prescriptions he was supposed to take once a day. This is a common cost-cutting practice for the private for-profit companies that handle the medical services for prisoners across the United States. There have been numerous articles in Prison Legal News about the inadequate, sometimes non-existent, and therefore deadly medical services that these companies provide. Prison Legal News is the only national voice that prisoners have in the United States. It was started over 25 years ago by Paul Wright while he was a prisoner here in Washington State. After his release, he continued to grow Prison Legal News to include the Human Rights Defense Center. It should be required reading for anybody trying to reform the current prison system, as it will show what deplorable and sad conditions that prisoners across the country have to face on a daily basis. We need to reform the way the prisoners and the correction officers interact. In the 1960s, they all took their GED classes together. That was before the warehousing of more and more prisoners for profit became the way of doing business, and the "we can't fix the prisons" line of thought became popular with criminologists. I would like to take this opportunity to use this video as an application to work with the federal government to save time and money now that they are phasing out of the private prisons. We can develop programs that will save time, money, and maybe even some lives. We are a registered nonprofit company in Washington State. We have already started training people for conflict resolution and communication skills. Please contact us by mail at Voices of Washington State Prisoners 2016, Post Office Box 66648, Burien, Washington 98166.